Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're examining a truly disturbing case, the ordeal of Bruce.
Yes, it's a difficult one.
He experienced the trauma of being assaulted, only to then find himself falsely accused. A situation that ultimately led to, well, a coerced guilty plea back in 2006.
Right.
Our goal in this deep dive is to really dig into the sequence of events, understand the legal pathways available in North Carolina to challenge this conviction, and importantly, to shed light on the profound emotional devastation that can happen when systems fail someone.
And for this exploration, we've got several key sources. We'll be relying heavily on a detailed briefing document about Bruce's case,
Okay.
along with crucial insights from the podcast series 3 Times a Victim, where Bruce himself talks about his experience.
That firsthand account must be powerful.
Absolutely. And we also have research documents looking at the relevant North Carolina law, particularly around post-conviction relief. So the aim is to bring all this together for a full picture.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The genesis of this whole thing. Bruce was physically attacked by someone named Anna.
Yes.
But then, in a really troubling turn, Anna immediately goes to the police, makes up a story, and falsely accuses Bruce of assaulting her.
It's quite the inversion of reality.
The briefing document quotes Bruce directly, and it's pretty stark. Anna attacks Bruce, but detectives listen to her lies instead. He also talks about the agony of reporting the crime against him, while at the very same time, Anna was at another police station making these false claims.
And what's really striking there, right at the start, is how quickly law enforcement seemed to accept Anna's story over Bruce's.
Yeah, why was that?
Well, it makes you question things, doesn't it? Were there biases or proper investigative steps just skipped?
Seems like it.
This initial failure to really look into Bruce's side of things, as the briefing document highlights, it feels like a really critical turning point. It set off this terrible chain reaction.
And following that flawed start, Bruce faced immense pressure. It all culminated in that guilty plea in 2006.
Right. The plea.
He's very clear that this plea wasn't voluntary, intelligent, or knowing. He uses the word coerced.
He says he was coerced into a plea deal by my lawyer, a public defender who threatened me.
Threatened him? How?
Threatened him with prison if he refused the plea deal.
Bruce describes being in, like, a dissociative state during the actual hearing. Just imagine the emotional weight of that.
That's incredibly intense pressure.
And looking at the plea itself, there's a key piece of evidence right from that moment mentioned in the briefing document. Bruce actually said during the hearing, well, that is what he told me to say for the purpose of this plea deal.
Wow. He said that in court.
He did. And legally, that statement is huge. It directly contradicts the idea that the plea was voluntary, which is what the court needs to establish.
So what should have happened?
Well, the briefing document suggests that kind of statement should have immediately triggered a duty of inquiry from the judge.
Meaning the judge should have stopped and asked more questions. Exactly. An obligation to probe whether the plea was really voluntary and understood. The fact that this apparently didn't happen, it raises serious questions about the safeguards meant to protect defendants.
Which brings us squarely to the issue of his lawyer. Ineffective assistance of counsel, or IAC.
Yes, that's the legal term.
It means the lawyer's performance was subpar and actually hurt the case, right?
Yeah, essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It fell below an objective standard of reasonableness and prejudiced the defense. And Bruce's description of his interactions with his public defender definitely raises those concerns.
He mentioned the lawyer said something like, no jury would ever think you were capable of this.
Right, implying a belief in his innocence.
But then, that same lawyer pressured him to plead guilty anyway, without giving him the full picture or preparing him to fight.
That's the account. And when you think about a defendant's rights, the lawyer reportedly telling him, say this, during that plea hearing, especially when Bruce maintained his innocence, it feels like a potential breach of duty.
Because the final decision to plead guilty has to be the client's, right?
Absolutely. The briefing document stresses that. The client has the ultimate say on the goals of representation, and a guilty plea is massive. It must be the client's informed choice, not just following orders.
The pressure he must have felt being told what to say about his own guilt, it's staggering.
It really is.
And this whole sequence, it just screams systemic failure. Multiple points where things went wrong. The briefing document puts it powerfully. When institutions betray the innocent, the psychological damage is devastating.
You really see that woven through his whole experience.
Yeah, first the police not properly investigating his report as a victim.
Then the possibility of coercive interrogation tactics.
The awful experience of jail being dehumanized.
Even abandonment by family, which he mentions, under the weight of these false accusations.
And then there's the missing police report from Bruce's own 911 call when he reported the assault against him. That just feels...
Very suspicious, yes. It's another layer.
These aren't just isolated mistakes, are they?
No, exactly. These interconnected failures show how injustice often works. It's not usually one single error, but more like a cascade. Different parts of the system failing, and each failure making the harm worse for the individual.
And the consequences last. The briefing document mentions ongoing problems finding work because of this false conviction.
That's right. It's a constant reminder of the systemic breakdown and the stigma that follows even when someone is innocent. The emotional toll of that, year after year. It's hard to fathom.
So, given this incredibly difficult history, what legal options might actually be available for Bruce now to challenge this conviction?
Okay, so the research docs and the briefing document all point to something called the North Carolina Motion for Appropriate Relief, usually shortened to MARE.
MARE, okay.
It's under a specific law, General Statute 15A 1415. This is the main way in North Carolina to challenge a conviction after the judgment is final.
And is there a time limit? Because this was back in 2006.
That's the crucial part. For certain grounds, especially constitutional violations like an involuntary plea or ineffective assistance of counsel.
Which seem relevant here.
Exactly. Those grounds can be raised at any time. There's no statute of limitations for those specific claims.
Ah, that's significant.
It really is.
Wow.
Keeps the door open, legally speaking. And the MARA process allows for evidentiary hearings, meaning you can present new evidence that wasn't in the original court record.
Like medical records, perhaps? Or testimony about his mental state?
Potentially, yes. Evidence that helps build the case for why the plea wasn't valid or why the counsel was ineffective.
But I mean, trying to overturn a conviction from that long ago, it must still be incredibly challenging, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge uphill battle. The legal system likes finality. There's a strong presumption that everything, especially a guilty plea, was done correctly the first time.
So how do you overcome that presumption?
To prove the plea was coerced, Bruce would need really strong evidence. The standard mentioned is objective evidence of improper conduct or circumstances, something concrete showing the plea wasn't voluntary by constitutional standards.
Which might be hard to find after all this time.
It can be. Expert testimony would likely be essential. Someone who could potentially link Bruce's mental health diagnosis or state at the time of the plea to the legal standards for competence and voluntariness. It requires a really careful, strategic legal approach.
The briefing document mentioned Bruce's book and the 3 Times a Victim podcast. How do those fit into a potential legal strategy?
Right. Well, his narrative is incredibly powerful for raising awareness, for showing the human cost.
Definitely.
But as primary legal evidence in court, the briefing document points out the limitations. They're seen as inherently self-serving from a legal perspective. Not sworn testimony, not subject to cross-examination in the same way.
Okay, so they can't just submit the podcast transcript as Exhibit A.
Not quite like that, no. But they play a vital complementary role. They can be absolutely crucial for developing sworn affidavits from Bruce, maybe from others.
Ah, I see. Like a guide.
Exactly. The detailed story he tells can be a roadmap for a legal team. It helps identify where to look for corroborating evidence, who else might have relevant information, and guides further investigation.
So it's not just about the legal side. Bruce choosing to share this incredibly personal, painful story. It feels like more than just trying to overturn a conviction. It feels like an act of reclaiming something.
Absolutely. I think that's a key takeaway from both the briefing doc and the podcast insights. It's about the power of narrative, of advocacy.
Even if the legal outcome is uncertain.
Even then. Sharing his truth is a way to push back against the injustice, to seek validation, to reclaim his own story after it was twisted by the system.
There's a quote in the takeaway document that really stood out.
Which one?
Healing is not contingent on external validation. Survival and truth-telling are powerful forms of reclaiming dignity and identity.
Yes, that captures it perfectly. It highlights the deep personal significance of him speaking out, regardless of the legal process.
It really shows incredible resilience, doesn't it? Facing that kind of institutional betrayal, as the briefing doc calls it, and still fighting for what he calls his hard-won truth.
It is remarkable. And it leaves us with a really important final thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Okay.
Think about the immense psychological weight. Not just being a victim of violence, but then being treated as the attacker by the very systems designed to protect you. Police, courts, even your own lawyer seemingly working against you.
That kind of fundamental betrayal.
How does that shape someone's core sense of justice, their trust in the world, their place in it? It's a profound question that sits right at the heart of Bruce's story, and sadly, it echoes in many other cases where institutions have failed the people they're meant to serve.
Mhm.